The year was 860. The emperor of the most powerful city on earth was far away. He was fighting a war against the Arabs. His army was with him. His capital was almost empty.
Strike the water! Pull together! Forward now!
Then something strange happened. 200 ships appeared on the water. They did not carry the flag of any known empire. They came from the north. They came from a cold land that most people in this city had never heard of. This is the story of the first Vikings who reached Constantinople. Who were these strangers? Where did they really come from? How did a small group of northern warriors shake the most powerful city on earth? To answer that, you have to go back to the beginning. A journey down a river changed the fate of two worlds. Keep that sentence in your mind. You will hear it again. The story starts almost 100 years earlier. It starts in Scandinavia. It starts around the year 750. Life in the north was hard, the land was cold, the soil was poor, but the people there had something special. They had ships. Long, fast ships called longships. These ships could sail on the open sea. They could also sail on rivers. This changed everything. Groups of northern traders and warriors began to move south. People later called them the Rus. Nobody is fully sure why they used that name. Some say it came from a Scandinavian word. Some say it came from a local Slavic word. The name is still a mystery today. The Rus did not travel for war first. They traveled for trade. They wanted furs, they wanted honey, they wanted slaves, most of all they wanted silver. To find silver, they needed new markets. And the biggest markets were far to the south, in rich empires that Scandinavia had never seen before. So the Rus followed the rivers. Rivers in Eastern Europe connect in a strange way. If you know the right path, you can travel almost from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea using only water and short stops on land. But there was a problem. Rivers do not always connect directly. Sometimes there is dry land between two rivers. The Rus found a solution. When a ship reached the end of one river, the men pulled the ship out of the water. They put logs under it. Then they pushed and dragged the ship across the land, all the way to the next river. Some of these ships were dragged for hundreds of kilometers. Think about that. Strong men, wet ground, heavy wood, no machines, just human power and time. This hard work built a trade road that would change history. Then the rivers led them south. By the early 800s, the Rus were not just visiting the rivers. They were living there. They built small trading posts along the Dnieper River. Slowly, these posts grew into villages. Some villages grew into towns. The land was not empty before them. Slavic tribes already lived there. At first, there was tension. Sometimes there was conflict. But over time, something else happened. The Rus and the Slavs began to mix. They traded with each other. They married each other. Slowly, two cultures became one. One town became more important than the others. That town was called Kiev. Kiev sat in a perfect position. It was close to the river. It was easy to defend. It became a center for trade, for power, and later for a new kind of state. This trade road was not small. It stretched more than 3,000 kilometers, from the cold waters of the Baltic Sea to the warm waters of the Black Sea. Along this road, one name kept appearing again and again. Traders spoke about it in quiet, excited voices. Warriors dreamed about it at night. That name was Constantinople. Then they saw the Golden City, at least in their minds, long before they saw it with their own eyes. By the middle of the 800s, stories about Constantinople had reached the far north. People said it was the richest city in the world. They said its churches were covered in gold. They said its markets sold silk, spices, and jewels from places most people could not even name. The Byzantine Empire called the trade route from the north the way to the Greeks. For the Rus, this route was more than a trade path. It was a path toward wealth beyond anything they had seen at home. At this time, Constantinople had around 500,000 people living inside its walls. No city in Western Europe came close to that size. London was small. Paris was small. Constantinople stood alone. The city had huge walls. It had a strong navy. It had centuries of experience defending itself from enemies. Many armies had tried to take it before. Almost all of them had failed. But the Rus were not thinking about attacking a fortress. Not yet. First, they wanted to trade. They wanted silver coins. They wanted fine cloth. They wanted a share of that famous Byzantine wealth. Slowly, small groups of Rus traders began making the long trip down the river and across the Black Sea. They reached the edges of the Byzantine world. They saw its wealth with their own eyes. And once they saw it, something changed in their minds. If this city was so rich and so far from home, and sometimes so poorly defended, maybe trade was not the only option. Maybe there was another way to get that wealth. Then the moment came. For almost 100 years, the Rus had built ships, built trade roads, and built a bridge between two worlds without even trying to. They came from cold rivers in the north. They followed the water. The water led them, step by step, toward the richest city they had ever imagined. They did not know it yet, but they were about to do something no one from their world had done before. They were about to sail their ships right up to the walls of Constantinople itself. And in the summer of 860, they finally did. A journey down a river changed the fate of two worlds. It had already changed the north. Very soon it would change the south too. It was the 18th of June, in the year 860. The people of Constantinople were going about their normal lives. Then someone saw ships on the water, not one or two ships, 200 ships. These were not merchant boats. These were Rus longships full of armed men. Panic spread through the city fast. The Emperor Michael III was far away. He was fighting the Arabs on another border. Most of his soldiers were with him. The navy was also away, guarding other waters. Constantinople, the richest city in the world, was almost defenseless. The Rus ships did not wait. They moved along the coast. They attacked villages and monasteries outside the main walls. They burned buildings. They took goods. They took prisoners. Inside the city, fear grew every hour. The huge walls of Constantinople could stop many enemies, but walls only work if soldiers stand behind them, and right now there were not enough soldiers. For the people inside, it felt like the end of the world was near. Their strongest army was gone, their fleet was gone, and a strange enemy with strange ships and strange language was right outside their gates. The attack did not last for months. It lasted only a few weeks, but those weeks shocked the entire empire. No one had attacked the heart of Byzantine power like this before, not so suddenly and not so close to the emperor's own home. Then, just as fast as it began, the attack stopped. The Rus ships turned around. They sailed away. Constantinople was safe again. But why did they leave? Then God, they said, saved the city. The people of Constantinople needed an explanation. A small, unknown enemy had almost defeated the greatest city on earth. That was hard to accept without a bigger reason. So they found one. They said it was a miracle. According to Byzantine writers, the patriarch of the city carried a holy robe believed to belong to the Virgin Mary and touched it to the sea. Soon after, a storm rose. The storm hit the Rus ships. Many ships were destroyed or badly damaged. The rest fled. This story became very popular in Constantinople. It gave people comfort. It said their faith had saved them when their army could not. But historians today look at this more carefully. A storm may have happened. That part is possible, but there is a simpler explanation too. The Rus came with 200 ships and a fast attack plan. They were not prepared for a long siege. A city like Constantinople had strong walls and deep supplies. Taking it by force without more men and more time was extremely difficult. So maybe there was no miracle at all. Maybe the Rus simply took what they could in a few weeks, then left before Byzantine reinforcements could arrive and trap them. Whatever the real reason, one thing became very clear to the Byzantine Empire. A new power had arrived from the north, and it was strong enough to reach the walls of their capital. This attack also created something important in written history. For the first time, Byzantine records clearly used the name Rus to describe these northern warriors. Before 860, they were almost unknown outsiders. After 860, they were a name that Byzantine leaders would remember for centuries. Fear turned into attention, and soon attention turned into strategy. Then trade began instead of war. After the shock of 860, Byzantine leaders faced a choice. They could prepare for endless war with the Rus, or they could try something smarter, turn a dangerous enemy into a useful partner. They chose the second path. Over the next decades, Byzantine diplomats and Rus leaders began talking instead of fighting. They built trade agreements. These agreements gave Rus merchants the right to enter Constantinople and sell their goods under clear rules. This did not mean peace was perfect. There were more attacks after this. In the year 907, a Rus leader named Oleg led another raid against Constantinople. In the year 941, another Rus ruler named Igor tried again. But each time the pattern was similar. Fighting happened first, then negotiation followed, and in the end a new treaty was signed. One of the clearest examples came from an agreement in the year 911. This treaty listed detailed trade rules. It named rights for Rus merchants entering the empire. It listed protections for more than 50 Rus traders by name. Think about that. A treaty between a rising northern power and one of the oldest empires in the world, written down with real names and real rules. This was not a small deal between strangers anymore. This was a real relationship between two political powers. Byzantine leaders were smart. They understood something simple. Rich empires do not survive only by fighting. They survive by managing their neighbors, sometimes with weapons and sometimes with paper agreements. Slowly, ships that once carried raiders began carrying merchants instead. Cargo replaced weapons. Silver moved from Byzantine hands to Rus hands in exchange for furs, wax, and other northern goods. The relationship was still not fully equal. Byzantine leaders still saw themselves as the greater power, but something had changed forever. The Rus were no longer just a mystery from the north. They were now part of the Byzantine world, tied to it by rivers, ships, and signed agreements. Then warriors became guards. A journey down a river changed the fate of two worlds. In 860, that journey brought fear to Constantinople. Only a few decades later, it was bringing trade, treaties, and a strange new kind of trust. But the story was not finished yet. The most surprising chapter was still coming. Soon, Rus and Scandinavian warriors would not just trade with the Byzantine emperor. They would stand right beside him, protecting his life with their own swords. By the year 980, the relationship between the north and Constantinople had changed completely. What began as fear had become trust. What began as raiding had become service. A new Byzantine emperor came to power. His name was Basil II. Early in his rule, he faced a serious problem. Powerful nobles inside his own empire tried to take his throne. He needed soldiers he could truly trust, soldiers with no connection to those nobles. He looked to the north. He asked the ruler of Kiev for help. In return, he received several thousand warriors from Scandinavia and the Rus lands. These men were strong, well-trained, and loyal to whoever paid them well. They had no family ties to Byzantine politics. That made them perfect guards for an emperor who could not fully trust his own nobles. This group became known as the Varangian Guard. The Varangian Guard was not a small unit. It became the emperor's personal protection force. These warriors stood beside him in the palace. They marched beside him in battle. They were often the last line of defense if everything else failed. News about this special guard spread far across the north. Soon, young warriors from Scandinavia began traveling thousands of kilometers just for the chance to join this famous unit. Joining the Varangian Guard was not only about payment, it was also about honor. Serving the Byzantine emperor became one of the most respected paths a northern warrior could choose. This guard did not exist for only a few years. It lasted for more than 300 years, protecting many Byzantine emperors across different centuries. Think about how strange this journey was. Around 100 years earlier, ships from this same region had attacked Constantinople as enemies. Now, men from that same region stood inside the palace, protecting the emperor's own life. Then the two worlds became one. The connection between the Rus and the Byzantine Empire did not stay only military or only about trade. It grew into something deeper: culture, religion, and identity. Byzantine influence slowly moved north, along the same rivers that once carried Viking ships south. The most important moment came from Kiev itself. A powerful ruler named Vladimir became Prince of Kiev. He wanted a strong religion to unite his growing state. After looking at different faiths, he chose Christianity in the Byzantine style, known as Orthodox Christianity. In the year 988, Vladimir accepted this new religion for himself and encouraged his people to do the same. This single decision changed everything that followed. Byzantine priests came north. Byzantine church design shaped new buildings in Kiev. Byzantine writing systems influenced how the Slavic language was written down. Religion was not the only gift from this connection. Art, architecture, and even ideas about government also traveled along the same paths that Viking traders once used for silver and furs. This decision from the year 988 still matters today. It shaped the religious identity of millions of people across Eastern Europe and Russia for more than 1,000 years. A group of northern raiders who once shocked Constantinople with fear ended up shaping the future of an entire civilization. Then history remembered them differently. Let's go back to that summer day in 860. 200 ships, an empty capital, a frightened city waiting to see what these strangers from the north really wanted. At that moment, no one in Constantinople could imagine the full story. They only saw danger. They only saw fire and fear. But history rarely stops at the first chapter. Those same northern warriors who once attacked the city later became its traitors. Then they became its protectors. Then their homeland became connected to Byzantine faith and Byzantine culture forever. A journey down a river changed the fate of two worlds. It started with silver and fur. It grew into fear and fire. It ended in trust, service, and shared belief. The first Vikings who reached Constantinople did not just leave with gold or memories of battle. They left something much bigger behind them, a bridge between north and south that shaped Europe for centuries. Sometimes an attack is not the end of a story. Sometimes it is only the first page.